Jumpin' Jehoshaphat, that was a long train, especially with all those folks traveling over to River Junction. It's the old settlers' picnic day in Walker Park. Every September on the second Sunday they have that reunion. Music, food, little play acting. It's quite a shindig. By the way, my name's Brad. Pleased to meet you. Take a load off while we wait for the next train. There's plenty of room on this here bench. While we wait, would you like to hear about one of River Junction's well-known characters? She lived just down the road. See that old brick building? Yeah, that was the general store she used to run. Her name was Annie Houseal. Why? Here's a painting of that store. It was done in What's that? You're right. I'm putting the plow in front of the oxen. Let's back up this tale of might. Annie was a Raymond to start out with. Houseal was her married name. Annabelle Raymond was born on a dirt farm in the middle of Nebraska. But the story really begins out east. Annie's great-grandparents were born about the time of the American Revolution. Timothy Raymond and Sarah Schofield were married in 1798 in Connecticut and then moved to New York, where Timothy became a farmer. They had 4 children, a girl and 3 boys. Their youngest, Albert Henry, was born in 1814. Henry, as he was better known as, would eventually become Annie's grandfather. Henry became a farmer like his father. Then Henry met a girl named Lydia Kent. They were married in 1840 in New York. In 1841, their first child was born. 10 years later, Annie's father was born. After her son Timothy was born, in 1856, Henry and Lydia Raymond moved the family to Louisa County, Iowa. Indians had populated the area just a dozen years prior to that, and the state of Iowa was only 10 years old when the Raymonds settled into their new home. 2 more children were born in Iowa, making 10 children in all for this pioneer family. Charles Coit Raymond, Annie's father, worked on his father's farm until he was in his mid-20s. Then he met a girl named Laura Alexander. Charles and Laura were married a week before Christmas in 1879. In 1880, a son Harry was born. Laura died shortly after Harry's birth. With a baby to care for, Charles soon wed a native-born Iowa girl by the name of Elizabeth Jane Strain. Once married, Charles and Elizabeth packed up their wagon with all their belongings and little Harry. Then they headed for the sand hills of Nebraska, settling down on a farm near the town of Ord, Nebraska, and Fort Hartsulf. Charles built the family a sod house to live in. In 1885, a son Alfred was born. In 1888, little Annabelle Raymond joined the family. 2 older siblings, mother and father, all living in a sod house. This was Annie's introduction to the world. The next spring found Charles and family following the Oregon Trail west. The rich, cheap farmland is what attracted them here. This is where Charles's family settled down to farm in even the more rugged home near Roseburg, Oregon. And this is where Sister Viola Florence was born in 1890. Spending a little over a year in Oregon, the Raymonds were soon moving back to Iowa, where they settled in Highland Township in Washington County. This is where the youngest brother James was born, and Charles was to spend the rest of his life farming and raising his family. His parents and many brothers and sisters live in Washington and Louisa County, and many of the relatives had married within the community also. Neighbors of the Raymonds were the John and Clara Houseal family. John Andrew Houseal of Pennsylvania had married Clarabelle Buffington in 1878. The Houseals were to have 11 children. John and Clarabelle's third and fourth children were a set of twins. Nellie Catherine and William John were born on February 5th, 1883. William John, or Jack as he was known, hired on as a farmhand on the Charles Raymond farm. On that Highland Township farm, Annie worked right alongside her brothers, raising corn and oats, milking cows, shearing sheep, and raising chickens were just part of the daily life, as was helping her mother and sister tend the garden and can the vegetables. Like many farm kids, Annie attended the local one-room school until the 8th grade. At that point she quit because the local high school was just too far away, about 9 miles. According to Kathy Houseal Bassett, Annie said her parents wouldn't hear of it, although her brothers all finished high school by the time they were 20. In her late teens, Annie hired out to women about to give birth, cleaning their houses, caring for their family members. By 1913, she had saved the unholy sum of $300. Annie had known the Houseals, including Jack and his twin sister Nellie, long before Jack came to work on the Raymond farm. The past few years, Annie had been keeping her eye on Jack. Now that she had a substantial savings in the bank, she began to think a little bit more about her future. That Jack Houseal looked like a hard worker. He came from a good family. His twin sister had married George Leffler. She knew the Lefflers well, as her half-brother Harry was married to George's cousin Molly. As a result, Jack Houseal and Annabelle Raymond were wed on February 26, 1913, on her father's farm. They stayed on at the farm until October of 1917, when they moved to River Junction, a town about 15 miles north. When Jack and Anna moved to River Junction, it was a prosperous town. This here railroad depot was there then, as well as a shipping station. Well, paint me green and call me a watermelon. Look over there in front of that old store. I'll be darned, that looks like Annie Houseal and Henry Walker. I've heard that their ghosts sometimes come to the picnic. Why don't we go see Annie and let her tell you about this town when she was here? Hey, Aunt Annie! Aunt Annie! Hi, Annie. Me and this gentleman here were just waiting at the depot for the next train to come by, and I was telling him about you and your life here in River Junction. But now that you're here, why don't you just take over the story? I really had just gotten to the point where you and Jack Houseal moved here into town.
One time, there were 4 general stores here in town. One of them was owned by Eli Fountain, J.D. Musser, Ed Porter, and my mind, it escapes me now who the 4th one was. And then Ezra Walker, he had a meat cutting house here, and that's what they needed that brick ice house for out in the back, was for ice for that, for the meat house. There was a lumber yard over here. Ed Porter had the lumber yard. Oh, he was the other one that had the other general store. And he had that, and then there was also a small gas station here at one time, and Frank Poland and his wife kind of worked for Ebb, and they took care of the gas station and the lumber yard. And of course we had the hog buying station, so this was a booming community. In fact, 100 people lived here in 1900.
Well, they even had a brick factory here and a cement block factory.
Well, yes. J.D. Musser. He's responsible for the bricks on this building. He also had 5 other little brick houses throughout the village here, which are all gone now. that he had built for his children. He made these bricks, but the problem with the bricks was they were made out of clay and it was too soft, so the buildings didn't last like they should have. So when he died, the brick business kind of went along with him. And then there was a fella called Mr. Stober. He had a cement block factory here. And if you can see the Henry Walker Park Memorial Building over there in the park, and then the ice house here, and that house that's up the corner here, those blocks were, cement blocks were made here for houses. But that didn't last either. It seems that they had a problem with moisture with the blocks. And they were cold, and houses were cold in the wintertime and hot in the summer. And they also made flower pots too, and there's still a few of those remaining in the cemetery and some out here and around town. But
yes, and I even heard they made cement blocks for silos. They built several silos too. Up here at Mr. Nelson's house, place up north here a few miles.
yep,
They put a new brick there. Yes, Annie, this was a real going town at one time.
Yes, it was. In fact, there's some of those silo bricks right over there on that slab. Over there where that tractor tire thing is over there. That used to be the coal shed for the train. And there's some of those brick liners over there for the silos. Yeah, but all those things come to pass, you know. People come, people go. Houses have been torn down. My store, I bought that store with my money. I ran the store. And Jack, he worked out. He was a farmhand. He worked for a lot of the local farmers here in the area when he worked. But, you know, he wasn't too reliable as far as the work goes. And he and I had words from time to time. I'd get real irritated with him. Why, the kids would come in and he'd give them free candy. Well, he couldn't have been doing that. I mean, how was I supposed to make a profit if he kept handing out everything free? Well, that wasn't bad enough, but he'd sit out here in the front porch, and when my cats would go by, he'd take his gun and shoot at him. And I know he did it because Terry Cruz over here and his grandpa, Earl Hinckley, used to drive by and see old Jack out there doing it. But the kids like to come here, and I'm sure the reason they like to come is because old Jack would give them free candy. But, oh, and Jack, he took care of the cemetery for a while. He'd dig the graves. He was like the cemetery sexton. And I'd help out with that too. And I mowed it, and we took care of it together. And then when Jack, he died, well, that kind of left me to take care of it by myself. And I did it as best I could. But some people kind of complained about things. You see, when there would be a funeral, I would go over there and get in those graves with my bare feet as they were filling them in, and I would stomp it down because I didn't want, you know, there'd be a sinkhole there afterwards. I wanted it to be nice and level so it looked good and it was easy to mow. Which is all fine and good, but some of the folks complained that maybe I could have waited until after everybody had left before I did my stomping. But anyway, I took care of it. But and when time went on, it got harder and harder for me to push that push mower and mow that grass down there. So, and then this was given by the Methodist Church to the county, and they made arrangements to have it mowed, so my services weren't needed any longer. But I still used to go over and look things over, make sure they were going on like they should be. And you know, a lot of my friends were there too, so I would, you know, that would bring back old memories of the folks I knew years ago.
Well, was the church open all the time, or was it just
well, the church, yeah, it was right over there. It was a Methodist church. It was on the same circuit as the Morfordsville Methodist Church up here, and the one in Lone Tree and Nichols. And it was opened in 1890, and they had services over here, and but not regularly. And then towards the end, and once in a while, there'd be an occasional funeral, or but there weren't regular services. People went to Lone Tree to the church. In Morfordsville, that kind of closed down too. And then it just kind of was left over there to decay. And it was falling down. And then the Conservation Board was given the park by the Henry Walker Park Association, and they took it down. But, you know, things were a lot different here over the years, Henry.
That.
That's right, you did. Well, Some of it I got from the local people. They'd bring in eggs and you know, veggies and vegetables and chickens and things like that that I'd sell here at the store. And well, you know, the bread came on a truck from Muscatine, and then there were some supplies that came on the train that used to run down along the bottom there. You know, you remember that, Henry?
Oh yes, yes. I donated the land for that.
That's right, you did. Here, Henry.
Yeah,
But we did have a lot of activities going on. Why, right down there over the hill was a ball diamond, and there was a ball game going on about every weekend here. And we had bands, and there were lots and lots of picnics over there in Henry Walker's Park. The churches had picnics there. The Methodists did some of their conventions there. People would come out from Lone Tree to use our park for different activities. Reunions were held there. It was a busy place, besides the flower shows, of course. There were many activities that went on in this grand old building, Henry. Why, we used to have big flower shows, and I was known all over the country for my giant dahlias. They were the size of dinner plates. When they used to refer to River Junction as the garden capital of Iowa. And I'd sold those dahlias too at times. And besides just having these flower shows, we'd have other exhibits. There would be things like fancy goods and produce. The farmers would bring in corn. It was kind of like a little mini fair. And we would get people in the local communities to sponsor some of these events. And it was well advertised, and many, many, many people came, and they'd have picnics over here in the park, and then there would be judging for these shows, and it was just a grand old time. But you know, we had many, many grand times here in this old general store here. Why, at one time there used to be another whole long section here, and above that was the dance hall. And there were many things that went on in the dance hall. We had dances, and we had hard time parties, and you just wouldn't believe it. Do you remember those dances, Henry?
Oh yes, Beth. I remember you didn't allow a bottle to go upstairs.
Correct about that. I'd have no drinking in my dance hall. Why, there may have been a few beverages consumed out here out front, but not in my dance hall. Why, you know, just common people came here. We usually had a band. There would be a drum, there would be drums, and there would be a fiddler and probably a piano. Yeah, I had a piano. And they would play music, and we'd do round dancing. It was kind of like square dancing. And the folks, they came, and they were just common folks. They were just dressed in plain, ordinary, good clothes, but nothing fancy. And they'd bring their kids with them. It was kind of like a family affair. They would come, and you know, they put the coats in the bedroom in the back, and we'd do our dancing. And then as the kids got tired, they'd go back and just crawl on the bed with the coats. And well, you know, and I had other things here at the store too. I had fabric, so people could come in and buy things to make a dress. Why, I remember when Aileen Hinckley over here came in one day and getting some fabric there. She was going to make little Leela a dress. Little Leela, she used to visit often. She'd come here for candy and things, and or to get a list filled for her mother, and she'd walk. They lived just down there, just not too far, and she walked down along the old railroad track, and that's how she'd find her way here and back. Then there was the hard luck parties. They kind of happened more in the later 30s and early 40s, when we'd get together with the neighbors, and you know, we'd have suppers and things like that. While we'd celebrate our birthdays, our anniversaries, the house seals, they would have their reunions here, and we just enjoyed ourselves. But as time went on, things got rough. You know, in the late mid-30s, the train that used to go through here was disconnected and abandoned. They came out and they took up the railroad. Well, I used to take care of the post office here, and after that happened, well, mail didn't come here no more. It came by truck. And so then also things that we got on the train for, you know, like things that I'd use in the store, that didn't come no more either. So, you know, the old train was pretty important to this community. Why, at one time, do you know that there was more livestock shipped out of this community than there was in Lone Tree. People would bring their cattle and their hogs right down this street and bring them down here and load them up on the train and send them on to Chicago. You know, there were other things that we shipped out of here too. There were wooden logs that they use for gun stocks. We shipped a lot of our grains, corn, wheat, oats, and all those kind of things went on the train. At one time, there were 4 freight trains and 1 passenger train that passed through here every day. Why, the folks over there from Riverside, they come over to the parties on the train, and they would on from Lone Tree too. They didn't take their cars or their buggies, they just hop on the train and come on over. But once that train left, the town just kind of died. And business kind of slowed down too here a bit. And then by the time the 50s rolled around, the old store had closed up, and we no longer had the dance hall, and things just got a little bit sad. There had to be some way I could support myself, so I decided I'd hang paper. Wallpaper, that is. I had this old Chevy pickup, and I'd take my ladder and all my paper and supplies, and I'd take it on out to the folks in the neighborhood and paper their houses for them. And I did a darn good job too. Why, I even papered for the Rainers up here. You knew the Rainers.
Oh yes, yes.
You probably knew the old Rainers.
The old
Rainers. Not Blinky and Francis. They came after you.
But
I'll tell you a story about that Blinky Rainer. Well, he and Francis one time decided that they were going to do their own papering, so they papered their upstairs, and well, I caught wind of it. So I decided I was just going to take myself right on over there and just check up and see what kind of a job they did, because you know I did a mighty fine job. So I gets over there about lunchtime. I opened the door. They're sitting at the table. I walked right in, went right upstairs, checked things out, came back down. I looked Blinky in the eye and I said, "Blinky, the only thing I can say is it's clean." I turned around, slammed the door, and walked right on out of the house. Didn't say another word. And I'll tell you, they sure gave me a look. But you know, people got to understand a person's got to make a living around here.
It became known as Stumptown.
Stumpy.
More people knew that than by any other name.
Yeah, and you know why they called it Stumptown, don't you?
Well, there's a few different stories. What have you heard?
Well, at one time, the train went through down there, and then there was a siding that came through just on this side of the train. And at the end of that siding, there was a huge, huge oak stump. And, you know, some of the fellows used to sit there and play poker. But anyway, it was used as a bumper for the cars as they came off on the siding so they didn't want to go too far and go off the tracks. That's one story I heard. The other one is, like I told you before, we used to ship out a lot of oak logs out, or oak boards out of here. And so there were many, many stumps around for trees that had been taken down. I suppose not only for that, but for as people cleared the land to farm. So that's another reason I heard it was called Stumptown.
Yes, well, I remember how I got started down here too. I came in with my brothers, and I went to the gold fields out in California.
I heard that story, Henry, yeah.
Well, I went out there to make money. And I did make some money. I came home with $2,600.
Boy, that would have been a lot of money, Henry. You must have been a rich man.
I was a rich man.
Did you do anything special with that money, Henry?
Well, I'll tell you what I did. I came down and took the $2,600 and bought a little over 200 acres of land down the road here a ways. And I started out with that. And then I heard that the railroad might be coming through. Well, I'll tell you what I did. I went to the railroad and I says, if you build the first train depot in River Junction instead of Lone Tree, I'll give you the land. Well, that's all it took. So we got the first train station here in Johnson County. Well, when I first come to this area, of course, they was still Indians around. And they used to be around over West Falls is and on back there. They was sort of a settlement there that the Indians still lived.
Meskwaki, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
They never caused any problems and stuff, and as more people came, they was moved on west.
Yeah.
And it was kind of sad to see them go.
Yes, it was. What kind of a house did you have down there, Henry?
Well, I started out in a log cabin when I first got married. Well, after that, I built a nice 3-story house down here about a mile. And the walls were about 15 to 16 inches thick, and that lasted for a long time after I was gone, but it was finally tore down. It was starting to collapse, and it was tore down.
I always made my own way. I always paid all my own bills and took care of myself. And I never depended on anybody for anything. So anyway, I went on hanging paper, and time went on, and I got older. But I still had my pigs, and I had sheep and chickens and things that I raised out in those buildings out back. And the sheep kind of stayed in the old ice house out there. And when they get big enough to take to market, well, I just put them in my old Chevy car there, either in the back seat or in the trunk, and I'd haul them on down to a stockyard, you know, pick up my check, and I'd be back home in no time. But then, time went on. The old Chevy didn't run anymore. Things were beginning to go downhill, and I was getting to be older and older. And it got so that I couldn't go anywhere anymore unless somebody took me. In fact, I had to rely on my neighbors to do almost everything for me. And the poor old store. Why, the east end here had kind of caved in. The piano fell through the upstairs down to the second floor, and it was just a pile of bricks out here. Well, there were people who would even come and get bricks and take them and use them for their hog lots. It was so sad to see that part of my life go. But that wasn't the worst of it. Here I was in this old store. I was old, and I just couldn't take care of myself so well. But there were a lot of good folk that lived here in the community. There was a potter and his wife that lived up the road there a bit. They would come and get groceries for me and help me with things here in the house. And over there, the Mincers, they got groceries for me. But one of the most important things that I wanted everybody to get was a battery for my radio. I like to listen to the ball games. And so as soon as that battery went dead, I had to get me another one, and they'd bring it for me. And you know, that's probably how I got to stay here as long as I did, because the neighbors were so good. Why there's some Morgan folks that lived over there, and I used to have this old wood burning stove in the back, and it was there for years and years and years, and it used to, you know, warm the store, and people used to come in and they'd play checkers around it and that kind of stuff. But it got to the point where it burned out, you know, and the chimney was shot, and I had wires strung up that were hanging it from the ceiling, but it wasn't too safe and it wasn't working so good anymore. So my nephew, Bob Houseal, he got me an oil burner. And so it wasn't a big one, but it was big enough that it did keep it warm in there. And I had these little milk jars or containers that had fuel oil in it. But that thing, I had problems with it. So from time to time, I'd have to call the Mr. over here, Mr. Morgan, and have him come over and fix it for me. That Mr. Morgan, I had to call him lots of times. He was always needing to come and help me with something. But I didn't live alone, not totally alone. These people that moved out of River Junction, and they left behind their dog. Well, I called her Lady, and I took her in, and she became my roommate, and I just loved that dear little dog. Well, one day Lady got out, and she met up with a fella. The next thing you know, we had Lady and the pups. Well, I enjoyed the pups too. Then I had a relative that lived over here, and she had chickens, and I used to let the pups run, and Lady, but they started to chasing her chickens, and she kind of told me that either I do something about those dogs or she was going to shoot them. And I knew that she was a good shot, so I decided I had better keep those dogs inside with me. So we all lived inside here, the dogs. Oh, I had cats too. I've always had cats. Why, I had cats when I had the general store. People used to kind of frown upon those cats because they had the run of the store. They get up on the counters, they were in the flour bins, they were everywhere. And people just didn't take to that. Well, anyway, I had the cats, and the cats took care of the mice and the rats, and the dogs kept me company. Well, time went on, and this part of the store began to decay more and more, and the roof was beginning to leak a bit, and plaster was falling down, and the rafters for the room on the back part where there was an inside toilet in the outhouse in the back, the floor had kind of rotted out there, so I'd taken some boards and made a little path so I could kind of get back there when I needed to go. And it was getting to look pretty rough in there. And I couldn't let those dogs out either, so we all lived in there, and it was kind of smelly. But those dogs were a lifesaver. You know, they slept with me and they helped keep me warm in the wintertime. I used to put on several sweaters and my winter coat. I did have boots that I wore in the wintertime. No need for them in the summertime, of course. But they kept me warm.
I used to visit Annie in that old store. We used to play cards and dance and sing around that old piano. We always had to leave, though, before dark, because she only had kerosene lanterns to see by. Hand me that old scrapbook again. I want to show you something. I remember back in 1966, a lady painter from Iowa City came out and got to visiting with Aunt Annie. Marjorie Hayek was her name. Mrs. Hayek liked to paint pictures of rural Iowa, barns and railroad depots and such things. Well, even that old store had started to crumble. Mrs. Hayek asked if she could paint a picture of the building. Annie said okay, and had us dig out some old photos that showed the place in the better days. That Mrs. Hayek painted a beautiful mural she called Annie's River Junction. Here's a picture of it. That painting, I believe now, belongs to her sons, John and Peter Hayek in Iowa City.
And then, well, things got worse, and I didn't get any younger. And one of the neighbors decided that maybe I shouldn't be living there by myself. So she got a hold of the DHS through the Fremont trustee, that Musser guy up here. And she made arrangements with my nephew, Bob Houseal, to find me another place to live. And so he had gone over to that nursing home over there in Wellman and had things all lined up for me. And this was in the wintertime, and I remember sitting there waiting, knowing that I was going to be leaving my home. Oh, I was just devastated. I had lived here for 70 years. This was my home. I knew most of the people that were over there in the cemetery. Of course, they were all gone. And it was so hard to think that I was going to be leaving my home, River Junction. There were so many, many good memories here. And then there was my dogs and my cats, my family. How could I leave them? And I sat there by the stove just about freezing to death, and lo and behold, here come the ambulance. And it got me, and I had to say my final farewells to the dogs. And I left and to go to the nursing home in Wellman. And I did hear later that the neighbor lady up here, Sherry, that she tried to find homes for those dogs. A couple of them went to relatives, and Sherry took a couple, and they put an ad in the paper asking if anybody would please help out and give these poor dogs homes, and telling the story about why they were abandoned, or why they weren't abandoned, but why they needed homes. And I never did hear if they all got homes, but I know some of them did. Oh, it was so hard. And then I had to face the fact that I was going to this new place to live. At first, I didn't care much for that nursing home. No, sir, it wasn't anything like River Junction. I don't care. But, you know, it wasn't the first time I was in a nursing home, though. Why, in the early 70s, I had fallen, and I broke both arms. So obviously, I couldn't take care of myself. So after I had my arms fixed, and they set them and put me in casts and stuff, they took me to a home in Iowa City. And there were some other ladies there that I had made friends with, and I really enjoyed living there. Well, then they shut it down for some reason, and I was moved to the Ferries nursing home, which is down south of town here. And I was there for a spell. And while I was there, somebody broke into my house, and they took my furniture. Well, they called them antiques, but they were just my furniture that I've had over the years. And they took it and sold a lot of it off. And well, I was still down there in the nursing home when all that happened. Well, I had made up my mind that I was coming back home, and by damn I did come back home. And I was here for a number of years before I had to go to this other nursing home. Well, when I got there, it was really hard to settle in. I missed home so much. Good old River Junction. But as time went on, you know, I even got to kind of liking it there. And that's where I lived for the last 5 years of my life.